I don't know where time has gone, but let's talk about everything I read in September. Hello, book friends. It's Alyssa. Welcome back to the channel. Hello, if you are new. We are here to do the monthly staple of looking back at what I read the month before and talking about it, telling you what I thought, reflecting on the month. So since this is so late, let's not waste any more time. I'm going to jump right into the Storygraph stats, and then we will hop into my bookly and talk about the individual books. I read 14 books, which is 5,295 pages. The average time to finish a book has gone down. It's now 5 days. I think it was like 7 days before. So I guess that's good. I don't know. And I'm happy to be at a more manageable number. 14 is much better than the 20 something I read the month before. The moods are the same as always: dark, reflective, mysterious, emotional, tense, sad. There's nothing really happy. My pace is pretty much between medium and fast. I didn't really have a lot of slowly paced books this month. For page numbers, interestingly, almost everything was under 300 pages, which is not normal for me. Usually I solidly in that 300 to 500 range, but I didn't really read that many chunkers. I don't know if I really even finished that many chunky books this month either, that had started in previous months, I mean. My split for nonfiction and fiction was a little bit different. We've been running on an 80-20 split for most of the year, and right now for September, we were on a 7% nonfiction, 93% fiction. My genres are nice and tight this month. So we have literary right out in front with some contemporary, thriller, mystery, and historical right behind it. There's not a lot of fantasy, a little bit of speculative this past month. I've just been in a literary mood, but I've noticed in October, I've been slowly feeling that urge to go back to fantasy. So there may be more by the end of the year. So I only have 13 reviews this month because one of the books I read that Storygraph is counting but isn't in my bookly is a craft book for writing, and it's The 5-Sentence Method by Rebecca Thorne. I'm counting it in my Storygraph just so I can remember what I've read before, so there's a place I can go back to and be like, yeah, I've read that one. It's not for a rating. It is a good book. So if you are writing, I really enjoy the insight that Rebecca gives on how she crafts a novel and how she drafts and plots and some of her tips on plotting and editing and all that. Really enjoyed that. I also really just enjoy Rebecca Thorne as an author. So I just appreciate hearing how she writes her stories. So anyway, there's 13 reviewed books, and of those, the star rating was phenomenal. I actually had a really good month in September. It was 4.15. It might be my best month so far. That actually made me really happy. I didn't realize it was that high. I was inputting all of my ratings into my call pile and everything this morning, and I did not realize that they were going to be like that stellar. Enough of that. Let's get into the books for September. Right off the bat, we have Owls Do Cry by Janet Frame. I learned about this book while reading Committed. I think it's on Women in Madness or something like that. I've talked about it a lot this year. I've really enjoyed it. It's a nonfiction memoir. But anyway, I learned about this author and this book while reading that. I also learned about a lot of fiction and nonfiction that centers around women and mental health and all of that. But anyway, so this is written by a New Zealand author back in the 50s, and her story is really interesting. She was basically about to be lobotomized. I think she had like a collection of short stories. She had something that was accepted to be published or won a prize. Basically, her writing saved her from being lobotomized. It changed the way she was looked at, and it was like, you can't do this to this great mind, basically. So she went on to write many books. There is a theme of mental illness or just like women and madness, depression, just dealing with your emotions, I believe, throughout a lot of her stories. But this is covering that. There is a character that is very similar to her, it seems, in many ways, to her story. But it's really a story about this poor, impoverished family. That's redundant, but this impoverished family in New Zealand post-war, their struggles, and really all of these characters are kind of an archetype for anybody. It could be anybody. I think I said archetype weirdly, but that's okay. So there's a family, and The mom and dad, the dad's very working class. The mom stays home, takes care of the kids. There's an older sister, a middle sister, and a young brother. I've forgotten all their names at this point, so please forgive me. There's a tragic accident that occurs near the beginning of the book to the older sister, and that really sends the entire family into a spiral. And you see how that incident affects each character, how they deal with it mentally. And the middle sister ends up being so distraught that she is institutionalized and she is going to be lobotomized by the end of this book. So it's her plot line is very sad, but they all take on these not so great coping mechanisms, but they all learn to cope in some way. It's a really great story. I very much enjoyed reading this, and I do think that it's worth a read. So if you are also kind of intrigued by stories about women and mental health and all of that, I would pick this up. It's really well written. It's very interesting. It's a different kind of style. It's not like straightforward, but I really enjoyed it. I think I really enjoyed it is going to be the theme for most of this. So I'm going to try not to say it too much, but I'm sure I'm going to say it a lot. The next book that I enjoyed is Swallow the Ghost by Eugenie Montague. I talked about this. I've talked about all these books in the newsletter, but I also mentioned this on the podcast because I loved this book. This is a debut and it's not perfect, but I really enjoyed this. And I would love to read what she writes next because I thought this was beautifully crafted, great story. It's really a story about who tells a victim's story. How are you perceived once you become a victim and you cannot speak for yourself, essentially? It's told in 3 parts from 3 different POVs about this girl, Jane. Something happens to Jane, and through these other people's stories, they tell us about Jane because Jane very quickly stops being able to tell us about herself. So I really enjoyed it. The structure sort of reminds me a lot of Trust by Herman Diaz. Different stories, but the way it's structured is very reminiscent of that book. So if you liked that structuring, you may enjoy this. I loved it. There's also discussion of being a caregiver to a family member with dementia that I think is very beautifully and tactfully handled in the story. Loved it. Next is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Alif Shafak, and this is the second Shafak I've read. It is phenomenal. I loved The Island of Missing Trees. I loved this as well. This is following 3 different narratives and along 3 different rivers, and really shows the connection between these people. It talks a lot about womanhood, colonization, the pillaging of different places by the West and putting it into our museums, environmentalist stuff, terrorist things. There's like so much in here about immigrant existence, like the life of being an immigrant. What do you do to survive as an immigrant in another country? It is so good, and it is quietly good. I'm shocked by how little I've heard about this book, but when I do hear about this book, it's all incredibly positive. I'm shocked that this was not longlisted for the Booker. It is definitely worthy of a Booker longlisted, slot. I can think of a few books that it could have knocked out. Because she just beautifully ties together these stories with a single drop of water. And she really shows how just being a thing existing on this earth, we are actually all connected. Our actions all have repercussions, and it does affect everybody. And it can happen through space, time, place. Beautiful. Loved this. So good. I also finished Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, which I don't think there is a Sally Rooney that will ever knock Normal People out of my top spot because it was like my gateway Rooney. So it has sentimental points as well, but this is like a very close second. Like it's licking its heels. It's so good. I think this is some of her best character work. Her work with Peter and the way his brain, when you are in his POV and you just feel so scattered and you can feel him losing control as the book goes on. It is so well done. I know that a lot of people don't like her style of writing, particularly because of like her lack of quotation marks and things like that. And I think Peter's stream of consciousness kind of points of view and that style for him can make that lack of quotation marks a little bit harder to manage if that's something that really bothers you. It doesn't really bother me because once I get in the groove with Rooney, I'm just in the groove. It's fine. I love this. I think if you've always wanted to try her out, I would start here. I think it's really good. It's about two brothers. They lose their dad. They're grieving. They have relationships because, of course, they have relationships. It's a Sally Rooney. It's also going to be about like love and relationships, but it is predominantly about these brothers. What happens to their relationship? What happened to their relationship before this? How do they grieve? How do they learn to understand each other? It is so well done. Please read it. The Madwoman's Ball by Victoria Moss. This is probably one of the least favorite books on this list, actually. I wanted more from this. I still want to watch the movie. There is a movie version of it, and I wonder if it plays out better as a movie than as a book. It was a little bit underwritten, I think. It's set in this insane asylum in Paris. It's like the 18 somethings. And our main character in general, our main character is this woman, one of our POVs is this woman, this young lady who is a little bit of a rebel in the sense that she wants to learn and she wants to just be more than what society expects a woman to be. And she's very eager to learn things that like a woman shouldn't be eager to learn, like science and spiritualism and anything fun. And one day her father just commits her to this asylum because she just does something that's too much for him to forgive or overlook. And because you can just commit your daughter to an asylum for the rest of her life, he does, and he washes his hands of her. Her brother very much regrets it, but he can't do much about it. He's also a bit spineless. And our other POV is this head nurse mistress at the asylum. And it is a real asylum. The doctors are based off of actual doctors and some of the things that they did. I don't know if Madwoman's Ball itself is real, but you get to meet a bunch of the ladies that live in this asylum. You get to see how maybe madness, the line between who's mad and who's sane is a little blurrier than one would think. And they're all sort of preparing for this Madwoman's Ball because once a year the Paris elite get to come to the asylum and the girls get to dress up in these ball gowns and they get to all intermingle, and basically the rich people get to, you know, ogle the insane women like they're in a zoo. All right, but under the guise of a ball. The ending is very rapid. I think that it could have been drug out a little bit more. I think we could have gotten a little bit more depth, basically. These were like half character studies. You could have gone further. I did enjoy the vibe of the book, which is why I wonder if I would like it more as a movie. Glad I read it. Quick read. You can read it in an afternoon, but I wanted a little bit more. The Princess of 72nd Street by Elaine Craft. I heard about this from your favorite booktuber, Kieran. She talked about it in her newsletter, I believe. So if you're not subscribed to her newsletter, I will put it in the description so that you do, because it is phenomenal. Subscribe to mine as well, but Kieran's is better. And I read her description of this and she wanted someone to buddy read it with, and I was like, I am down, because this really paired nicely with all of my reading about women and madness, so I was all about it. So this is about this woman, the Princess of 72nd Street, and she's basically going through a manic episode, and I cannot remember what she calls it. It's like the glimmering or the shining or the something. She has a term for it, but it's her going just before, during, and then the aftermath of this manic episode. And she does a lot of interesting things during the episode. She sexually gets herself into a lot of predicaments. There's a lot of abuse by men and people taking advantage of her in this state, and she's not really aware of it. And then afterwards, how does she deal with it? It's an interesting look at what potentially it could look like to be bipolar, to go through these manic episodes. I am not bipolar, and I don't know how accurate or how many people who have experienced manic episodes how accurate it feels for them. But I thought it was really interesting to add to the catalog of my reading of Women in Madness. So I did enjoy it. The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. This is part of a very long going vlog that I'm filming where I'm rereading all of Donna Tartt's books. So that will be out by the end of this year because I need to finish it by the end of this year. I'm not doing it into next year. I just have the Goldfinch to go. This was the only Donna Tartt that I had DNF'd, and rereading it, I was very nervous. And when I first started reading it, I had the same feelings I was having when I picked it up the first time. I didn't really understand where we were going. It felt very plotless. It just felt like character studies. I didn't really get the point. Some of the language is very abrupt, and I couldn't quite tell if she was handling it well. Some of the racist language that is in here, which is here because this is set in the 60s in the Deep South. So there is going to be a rationale for it. But when I first read it, I felt uncomfortable in so many different ways, and I couldn't get into the story. This second read, I had a very different experience. I really enjoyed this. I wouldn't call it plotless. It's just more character than plot, but there is a plot in there, and it's not a murder mystery. It's not a crime novel. It's not a young woman solving the death of her brother, whatever the back of the book says. It is really a story about people, about relationships, about the crumbling South, about poverty, about racism. It's about so many things. And I think this is one of those books where you can really see how Tart's love of Dickens has affected her writing. Like this is a very Dickensianly structured novel. It is beautifully written. Kieran, I don't know if this is my favorite Tart. It definitely is better than The Secret History. If you ask me, it's a much more mature novel. It's a much more meaty novel. I think it's asking deeper questions. I think it's doing more. It's just better. It's just a better book. Next up, I have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is a TBR Lowdown book club pick for the year. So we just filmed our discussion for this. So this will be up shortly, but I love this book. Dystopian fiction translated from French. It is about a girl who is in this cage with all these women. She is the youngest person there. They don't really know why there's a child there when everybody else is a woman. They don't know really why they're locked in this cage with these men on the outside cracking whips. But one day, by chance, the men disappear. They are able to break out of this cage, and then the story begins of them figuring out how to survive, how to rebuild community, what happened to them, what's going on, where are they, all these things. It is so well done. It is just such a great book. I will caution you that if you want to watch our discussion, I would read this first and then watch our discussion over on TBR Lowdown. I'll try to remember to link it in the description whenever that goes live. Such a good book. Please read it. I think the introduction's funny. The author who does the introduction keeps saying how like she wishes more people knew about this book, but they just don't, and all this stuff. And I think it's hilarious because I wish that Hartman could have lived long enough to have seen the rise of Book Talk, because I feel like this is a Book Talk darling, and much well deserved Book Talk darling, by the way. I did DNF a book this month. I did DNF Nicked by MT Anderson. This is really short. It's about these it's about a monk and like some other people in like the 11th century going to steal the remains of Saint Nicholas for some reason to cure some plague or something. I think it's supposed to be funny. I think it's supposed to be like almost like a parable. I'm not sure, but I couldn't get into it. I felt like I needed a lot more background information to understand what the heck was going on. So I felt very lost from the get-go. The humor didn't land for me. I've watched a few other reviews, and some people said they found it really funny. So it just isn't my humor, I guess. So it didn't. I was just like, I see that might be funny, but it's not funny. So I DNF'd it. I did not DNF, and I enjoyed The Day Death Stopped by Rebecca Thorne. I thought this was just so much fun. I needed a fun book after all those books that were just about women and madness, and this fit the ticket. It's about witches. There's one witch to rule them all, basically, and there's one born in every generation, and they're called the Zorro. But this time two were born, and then like what happens when there's two? Why do you pick one over the other? What happens to the one you don't pick? What happens if they become friends? And then one day death stops. So it was just a good time. Our Claire, one of our witches, she's so funny, so funny. I really enjoyed her. She also has a very sad backstory. So much. It's just a good book. Please read it if you're looking for something like witchy and fun this fall season. I think this fits the bill, so I would encourage you to read it. I did read a graphic novel as well, and this is Victory Parade by Leila Corman, and this I got from the publisher, and it's set in Brooklyn during World War II, around the time that the concentration camps are being found and liberated, and it's just I love the art style. I think it's very kind of grotesque and beautiful. And the story was very moving and really shows how these things cross oceans, cross space and time to affect all kinds of people. It's about these two women in the beginning. This one Jewish woman who's married, her husband is off fighting, and she takes in this woman at some point. I'm kind of fuzzy on when she takes her in, but she takes in this refugee, and you see what this Jewish refugee, is going through in her own life. She's got a lot of anger and rage, and then the wife has a lot of other conflicting issues around her husband and who she loves, and they have a daughter. And it's just a beautiful story about people and how the trauma of the Holocaust has affected them, and it's the people across the pond. And I think that showing that reach of how far trauma can go was really well done and important to read about. Loved this. I didn't like so much The Night Guest by Hilda Nottsdatter. I definitely said that wrong. This is like a horror novella, and I really liked what it was trying to do. I just feel like it needed a little bit more. It wasn't giving me enough. I feel like she rushed some things. She should have set things up a little bit better. Like, we know that the sister is dead, and we know that the sister died in the ocean, and we know that the sister died for some reason, but we don't get enough background on that. All the things that are happening in the story that are the part of the horror of it are because of her processing this trauma of losing her sister. So not having more background about that dynamic between her and her sister, about what happened to her sister, all of those things made the ending feel a little bit hollow for me. But I've also seen a lot of people who really loved this book. So this just might be like a taste thing. I feel like it needed a little bit more writing. It needed just like a little, like one more draft, two more drafts to make it tighter and better and have that horror element really just punch through. But for me, I felt like it was really relying on the vagueness to create unease and that sense of like haunting narrative. But I don't think that for me that worked. Based on the fact that other people really liked it, maybe I'm wrong. So maybe give it a try. I don't know. After that, I have Liars by Sarah Manguso. This is a story about a relationship. It's about a married couple and their terrible marriage, and the ways in which this woman tries to convince herself that everything's okay, how the marriage crumbles. It's about these two artists who meet and they get married. He is very emotionally abusive. He's very jealous of any of her success. Anytime she does well, he undermines it. And he just continues to do this throughout the story. He also is sort of like a deadbeat in a lot of ways. He's constantly moving them around the country, chasing his next like entrepreneurial business deal. He's not great. He's a sea of red flags, and you want to yell at him the entire time you're reading, or at least I did. Eventually the marriage breaks down, and you just are reading this woman processing her life, trying to keep everything together, trying to be a good mom, take care of the home, be a good wife, somehow have a career, all the things she puts to the side for him. It is so good. If you like stories about breakups and marriages and like the ugly side of those things, I think you'll really like this. The aftermath sections are really interesting. Loved this. Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. I did enjoy this book. However, there's like a 2-page spread where they're basically like our main character and this friend of hers are basically fat shaming a child who's playing in the playground with their kids. And I just found that unnecessary. Like, I don't really know why that needed to be in the text. It felt uncomfy. But anyway, it's a story of a woman who has a baby. I can't remember who's who. I think she's Soldier and the baby is Sailor. And the point is that this could be any young mother. You watch her struggling to be a stay-at-home mom, and with that loss of self that comes when you have a child, and struggling with feeling like she's good at being a mother and raising her kid correctly. I think the fat shaming comes because one of her struggles is about making sure she's feeding her kid correctly, like healthfully. She doesn't want him to just be filled with sugar or anything like that. And I think that's kind of where the fat shaming was coming from, but I just don't think that we needed to cover it that way. But it happened. We're moving on. It's a really great read at letting you into like the psychology of a new mom and the struggles that they have, the thoughts they have, the worries they have, the highs and lows, the loneliness at times, the way it affects your relationship with your partner. There's a lot to love in this, but that like 2-page spread was just a little too awkward for me to rate this super high because I just felt jarring because it didn't need to be there. But in general, I think this is a great story if you like stories about motherhood and that early days, the struggle of being a mom. And that is everything that I read in September. So yeah, I had a really good month last month. I'm hoping to continue the trend through the end of the year because I need to make up for how much of a slog Booker was. But I am still reading, of course, Lies and Sorcery. I will be reading that till the day I die or till the end of the year, whichever comes first. That's not a good joke, Alyssa. Don't joke like that. But I also carried over The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir, which we're reading over on Discord with my patrons. So that's there. I think I also started A Dance to the Movement of Time, the first movement by Anthony Powell, which is a great, I finished it, so we'll talk about it more for my October reads, but great first chunk of volume, that's the word, first volume in this quartet that goes from like the 1920s. I misspoke somewhere when I talked about it before to like the 60s, I think. I think these first books are written in the 50s-ish, and then he kept writing for quite a while about it. It's capturing like history from, you know, Britain's sort of perspective, because all of our characters are pretty much British. And you're seeing how lives are affected by greater world events. And it's a huge, huge epic tale with like 300 characters. There's so much in it. There's a whole Anthony Powell society that breaks down every book and a lot of the things that are referenced in it because there's just so much. And I think if you enjoy history, if you enjoyed Brideshead Revisited, any of that kind of stuff, you should read these. They're good. I'm enjoying myself. I'm just waiting to start the second movement because I'm reading it with a friend. But anyway, that's everything I read. I'm very excited that it's October. I really like everything I've been reading in general so far. And I just love, I don't know, October is like the perfect month for reading. You can still read outside a little bit. It's still sunny. The days aren't so short yet. The trees are beautiful. You just want like a cozy, mysterious, witchy, wonderful story. But anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts if you've read any of these books. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video, whatever it may be, because it's my channel and I can do whatever I want.